This week, Emmett and Patrick talk about their favorite comics of the past decade. Then Chuck Coletta and I chat about what we liked best in the 2010s. If you're looking for good comics that you might have missed from the past decade, from superhero to comedy, historical to horror, we'll give you plenty of titles to look up. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. We're talking about our favorite comics of the 2010s in this episode. You can find all the titles and creators listed in the show notes, with links to those books on Amazon, and in some cases, links to episodes of Deconstructing Comics where we discussed them in more detail. Later, we'll hear Patrick's list, and Chuck Coletta of Bowling Green State University and I will share ours. First off, here's Emmett.
Hello folks, this is Emmett for Deconstructing Comics. Over here in Melbourne on this long, hot Australia day, I've decided to take the time to go through my favourite comics from the 2010s, whatever we're calling those years, the past decade, and I've made a short list of 10 titles that I particularly like and would, without hesitation, recommend to anybody else. So I'm just going to quickly list off these titles, give a short explanation as to why I feature them here, and hopefully you'll hear something that you haven't heard of before and will want to check out. So first up, Carla Speed McNeil's Finder. Now, this is a bit of a cheat because Finder was a webcomic that was published throughout the 2000s, and I, as well as I think a lot of other people, first heard of it not through word of mouth, but from Mr. Warren Ellis trumpeting it from every possible medium he had access to. Read Finder, read Finder, read Finder. And it is available to buy from Dark Horse now in these giant, thick volumes that you can still pick up, I believe. And that's great. And I recommend you check them out because they're very impressive. But I have chosen Finder Talisman, which is a shorter, more niche aspect of the Finder universe by Speed McNeil, and I think it's probably easier to find and maybe a bit of a taster for what the overall world of Finder is about. What is it about? Well, the word that keeps getting thrown around is Aboriginal sci-fi, or I guess mythic sci-fi. Namely, there's this character called Jaeger, and he has this sort of spiritual role. He's this sort of mythic character in his own right in a cyberpunky future where he interacts with these characters we get to know over the course of the series. A lot of them are stuck in dead-end lives, dead-end jobs. A lot of them are sort of concerned with sensorium, like experience of virtual reality, experience of telegraphed sensation through devices they attach themselves, plug into themselves. Classic cyberpunk themes, and then this character who's almost like a coyote type character, this god-like demigod character, enters their lives and changes them for the worse or for the better. Talisman I chose because this one is about a particular family, a young girl, and her love of books. And Jaeger has introduced her to this book that she becomes obsessed with, although she can't read. So it is a talisman for her. It's this object, this fetish object, that she, as she goes into adulthood, is desperate to find again. And there's a bit of a twist as to what the book actually was. There's a couple of nods to the never-ending story. There's also lots of passages that Jaeger reads to her from the book from published books that you recognize. To Kill a Mockingbird is in there, some Ray Bradbury's in there, Stephen King's in there. This is a book about loving reading, but it's also about creative frustration, as the main character herself decides she wants to be a writer, and then she feels stymied by the blank page. So it seems to be a bit of a testament from Carla Speed McNeil on the creative process as a whole. And given how broad Finder is as a creative work and how many different sources she touches on over the course of the series, I can't imagine her ever being creatively stymied, but there you go. So Finder Talisman, check it out if you can. It's available from Dark Horse. Great, great book. Okay, next up, I'll try and speed this up a bit. Next up, Jean-Michel Dupont and Mezzo's Love in Vain, Robert Johnson. So this is a comic about the life of blues musician Robert Johnson. Incredible art. There's this sly narration throughout the book. I won't spoil who's speaking to us, the reader, but there's this point of view character who's talking to us and describing the life of Robert Johnson in this very sort of insidious way. You probably pick up who this means. There's lots of little historical details I loved. I cannot stress how much I love the art by Mezzo. It's just so good. And if you like your blues history or musical biography, this is a great book. Surprisingly heartfelt, surprisingly rich as a comic. In terms of its function as a musical biography, I haven't read a lot of comics that do musical biography in this way, so this was a pleasant surprise for me. Strongly recommend to check it out. Next one is also a bit of a music book. It's Tillie Walden's I Love This Part from Avery Hill. Tillie Walden's a rising star. She's doing great work. She's got a series of graphic novels out now you can check out. I keep coming back to I Love This Part, though. It's simple, it's direct, it's about a love affair between two teenagers. They're growing into intimacy over music and sharing music through mobile devices. And I don't think I have seen how music technology today can intersect with romance as well done before. I think this is a very contemporary book. I think it speaks to the now, and it's also just sweetly romantic and a bit sad as well. I really enjoyed this one. I think about this book a lot. I think about what Tillie Walden does with this book a lot. It's strongly recommended. Okay, Emil Ferris's My Favorite Thing is Monsters. We already did an episode on this. Kumar and I talked at length about why we love this book so much. It's her debut. I can't get over that. The second volume's coming out. The first volume says a phone book. Lots to get into there. Fantastic work. I recommend you check out the previous episode of Deconstructing Comics. And you're what I have to say about that. But yes, again, as everything else in this list, strongly recommended. Next up, Ryoko Kui's Delicious in Dungeon. This is a rare dip into manga for me. I'm woefully ignorant of a lot of manga, but this one spoke to me. It's about food, it's about fantasy fiction, it's funny, it's witty, the art is great, the characters are all drawn out really well in terms of their plot function, in terms of the actual character description of them. Why do I love this book? It's about a group of fantasy dungeon crawlers, and their character and their group is kidnapped or taken by a monster, and instead of going back to base to stock up on supplies so they can go deeper into the dungeon to find their companion, they decide to adopt the tactic of eating the creatures they find in the dungeon as they go. So this is a really fun book because we then see the recipes they prepare for each of these creatures, these fantasy creatures who, of course, don't exist. So then there's these recipes that basically apply principles of cooking to something which doesn't exist and spills it out in detail for you, the reader. So you get to see, you will be hungry by the time you finish this book. And it's a memorable experience reading this book, and that's one of the reasons principally why I chose this. It's just such a unique innovation in terms of, again, taking comic book medium and doing something different with it. So Ryoko Kui's Delicious Dungeon, there's a couple of volumes out there translated to English. Check it out. Okay, next, one of my favorite books from the past decade by a veteran comic creator. I need to know more of her work. I want to track down more of her work. Carol Swain's Gast. I've written about this elsewhere at length. It's this heartbreaking fable about a lonely girl stuck in the country, and she makes a friend with. It's best I don't tell you anything really. It's about a lonely girl in the countryside, and the art is stunning. That's all you need to know. Also, will break your heart. Gast. I don't know if this is relevant, but Gast is a word for spirit or ghost, but I will say no more. It's one of my favorite books in the last 10 years. I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop recommending to people. I want to see more people talk about this book. I want to see it on more lists. I want to see it being referenced as a core text of the last 10 years. The pacing of it, the storytelling techniques used in it, I think it's great. I think it's a masterpiece, actually. And buy it. If you see it on the shelf, buy it straight away. Next up, no surprise, I think Tim's doing an episode all about this series, Giant Days, which is recently finished up, created and written by John Allison with a host of collaborators who've come in and adopted his house style. I've recently started reading his next series, Steeple, as well, which I love a lot. It's a sort of riff, it's comedy horror riff on British Hammer horror films, and satanic panic movies. But that's the one side. Giant Days is the kind of series that I will keep coming back to. It's addictive, it's hilarious. It's about a trio of girls going to university in England, and the relationships they have, the breakups, the friendships, the conflicts with student body authority figures, getting drunk, getting a dead-end job, being, again, creatively frustrated. There's so much in here which just feels like a moment from your life stitched into a comic book. That's how I feel when I read it. It reminds me of a time and place in my own life, although I was never a teenage girl in England, but for some reason it's very familiar to me. I love this series. Every time a new volume came out, I snapped it up. I knew it was a worthwhile experience. And easy recommendation. I'm sure most of you already are reading Giant Days, but more of you need to, and more of us need to support whatever John Allison does next, because this is great. It's just fantastic comics. Yeah. Mr. Alan Moore was, of course, going to appear in this list. But maybe the one I've chosen might surprise you. I've gone for Alan Moore and Jacen Burrows' Providence from Avatar. Yes, Mr. Moore, all is forgiven for your Neonomicon, that series which burnt my brain. But Providence is fantastic. It's a prequel of sorts to Neonomicon, in that it is also concerned with this idea of what if Lovecraft's fiction were real with a capital O, like too real? What if Lovecraft's Cthulhu monstrosities were all around us, and the life of Lovecraft was somehow wrapped up in all this too? It's about a character who is on the trail of Lovecraft's fiction and unwittingly is bringing about a Cthulhu apocalypse. What else is there to say? If you like Lovecraft fiction, this is a love letter to all of those things, those dark little whisperings that you are familiar with. If you dislike Lovecraft, if you dislike his racism, his bigotry, his misogyny, well, I think this is interesting work for you too, because it's a very critical account of Lovecraft's fiction and Lovecraft the person. I think it's one of the best things Alan Moore's ever done. I think it's fantastically researched, and Jacen Burrows' art really works to the premise of the book. The stiffness of his art reflects the stiffness of Lovecraft's prose, but there's this idea that there's something creepy going on beneath the surface. Somehow Burrows and Moore together, this collaboration, has produced something which is so suggestive of the rot at the heart of Lovecraft and the heart of his fiction, and the heart of the mind that brought to bear all this toxic ideas into this compelling horror fiction that he produced, and which obviously still has a pull on readers. And part of Providence is this speculation as to why Lovecraft has grown in popularity down through the decades. Why is it that this post-millennial age, we're all talking about Lovecraft all the time now, and Providence tries to answer that question in typical, more over-the-top fashion. I really like this. I think it's, as I said, it's one of the best things Moore's done, and it also managed to channel a lot of what he considers his negativity. He famously blames himself for the downward turn of, let's say, the ethical compass of comic writing after Watchmen, and this feels like him grounding Lovecraft's similar negativity. Next up, a superhero book. And I don't want it to seem from the list that I've presented with today that I hate superhero comics. I love superhero comics. I'm all about superhero comics. But this really does take the cake. This is Al Ewing and Joe Bennett's The Immortal Hulk. And the reason I'm listing it here is because it is a horror superhero comic that is absolutely true to both of those descriptors. It is one of the most horrific, visually disgusting, graphic comics you'll see in the stands this year. It is also one of the most faithful, creative, inventive invocations of Marvel Comics history and canon. Every Hulk storyline from the last 50, 60 years, every single bit character is referenced. They walk on, they're being transformed by this new take on the Hulk that Ewing has come up with, which is this sort of merging of science and mysticism, and it's like a love letter to Hulk, to the history of the Incredible Hulk. It's a great, great comic series. Like Giant Days, this is addictive. If I see it, I grab it. It's the one I wait for. It's the one that I will recommend to anyone. The Immortal Hulk starts off a bit slow and then just turns into this horrific nightmare of what being the Hulk and being trapped in the Hulk would mean, and all the people around the Hulk and the impact he's had on all their lives, and this sort of concentric circles moving out from him. It's really, really good. Al Ewing's coming into his own at the moment as a superhero writer and is a top tier comic writer at the moment, and I think this is next level from him. So yeah, The Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing, Joe Bennett, and Joe Bennett's art. Jesus, everyone who talks about his take on the Abomination and how amazing it is, believe what they're saying. He's doing something special here. This is a fantastic, grotesque piece of work from Joe Bennett. Just so good. And finally, I'm not going to say too much about this because it just changed me after I finished reading it, and I put it down, and then I didn't want to pick up again for months afterwards. Gilbert Hernandez's Julio's Day. This is beautifully paced, heartbreaking, really grounded fiction writing, really grounded art. Gilbert Hernandez, you know his work, you know how good he is. This is just fantastic. Julio's Day, get it. And that's all I have to hand at the moment. Some other quick shout outs: Orc Stain by James Stokoe. How that man produced that level of detail in that work. It was amazing. Sally Heathcote, Suffragette by Bryan and Mary Talbot and Kate Charlesworth. Great piece of historical comic writing on the history of the suffragette movement in the UK. The Abaddon by Corin Shedme. I think every review has mentioned that it's a riff on Sartre's Huis Clos. It's also a weird phantasmagoria, very horny comic book, if I might say so. Beautiful art, lots of pink goop, and great use of color. The Abaddon it's like pop nihilism. You'd love it. The Experts by Sophie Franz really struck me as a very interesting comic, and anything she does next I'll pick up. And I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Surface Tension by Jay Gunn, which is an English horror science fiction story about undersea creatures invading an isolated, mostly underwater part of the UK. Amazing visuals. Jay Gunn had done a lot of video game animation, illustration, and it's hyper detailed. This is beautiful looking package. Special Exits by Joyce Farmer, broke my heart. Snark by Roger Langridge, put it back together again. Peter Cannon, Thunderbolt by Kieran Gillen and Casper Wingard, again another superhero comic book, but one that directly addresses the legacy of war on superhero comics and creates this beautiful synthesis of Moore and Peter Cannon, these characters that he transformed from the Charleston comics into the Watchmen characters. It takes all of that and just fuses it together. It's a really impressive piece from Gillen. Really impressive how Casper Wingard adapted to all the different artistic choices that needed to be looked into this overview of Moore's comic career. Really interesting comic book. I don't spoil anything about it. It's a superhero comic with a difference, and I also really enjoyed Henny by Miss Lasko-Gross. That's her name, Miss Lasko-Gross, and it's like a fairy tale fable about religious fundamentalism. I'll say no more than that. I've noticed a lot of my picks have been Fantagraphics books. I guess I'm buying a lot of Fantagraphic books, but there's been lots of great stuff from the mainstream publishers. By that I mean Marvel and DC and Image, and there's lots of great stuff coming out from the smaller indie press books. And at a push, I think I lean more towards that side. But yeah, there's people coming out now like Ice Cream Man and things like that. Like I just really strongly recommend. So anyway. Thanks for listening, folks. I hope this inspires you to check out some new comics.
Hello, this is Patrick Ijima Washburn of Patokon.com, coming to you from Kumamoto, Japan, and introducing my favorite comics of the teens. So I'm going to start out with archives and reprints. I thought the Jiro Kuwata Batman or Bat Manga, translated by Sheldon Drishka, was a lot of fun to read, and it was digital first, and I had a subscription, so I was looking forward to those episodes every time. A lot of interesting characters pop up in it, and Jiro Kuwata is basically your go-to guy if you wanted a TV adaptation, like a TV show adapted into comics. He was your guy. He did Ultra 7, he did all kinds of Gekko Kamen, he did all the big names, and he really brought a lot of action to those characters that were, sometimes a little bit stiff on screen. Another archive edition, 4-Color Fear, edited by Greg Sadowski. This was a big eye-opener. This was like pre-code horror comics that were not EC, because everybody knows about EC, but what most people don't know is that there were tons and tons and tons of horror comics put out by other companies. And this collection, 4-Color Fear, has a bunch of those. And what's interesting is that actually 2 of the stories featured in the 4-Color Fear were swiped by Gegege no Kitaro creator Mizuki Shigeru. So that's interesting. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. Basil Warburton, just great stuff. And then the Lone Wolf and Cub Gallery Edition by Kazuo Koike and Goseki Kojima. The collection editor did a great job, Chris Warner. It's got real life, actual size scans of the artwork, which, I'm a big fan of Kojima Goseki. And so, really nice to see those brush strokes, actual size. My best reread, one that I go to every once in a while, was Rover Red Charlie by Garth Ennis and Michael DiPascale. Rover Red Charlie is the story of 3 good boys, dogs, at the end of the world. And they have to survive nefarious felines and crazy humans and each other as they work their way across the country. It's every time, this story gets me into tears. So, I can't recommend it enough. Let's see. For role-playing stoner comics, there's only Dungeon Quest by Joe Daly. I really like the kind of... It's a very tight, very, clean style, very stylistic, but super interesting. I mean, you don't even have to be a role-playing fan like I am to enjoy it. I think it's just very surreal and an adventure, but also kind of makes you think about things. It's I just there's a lot of fun in this too. It's a little bit darker, but I enjoyed this one a lot. Let's see. For super meta comics on comics, retro love, I can't recommend Bulletproof Coffin enough by David Hine and Shaky Kane. And wow, this is an interesting comic. It just has layers, and it kind of the actual creators themselves are characters in the comic, as are the comics. So the comics they create become basically world-changing artifacts. They affect reality, and there's a lot of love for old science fiction, old comics. So if you're into retro and vintage stuff, this comic, which has it almost has like a 1980s Bob Burden art style, which Bob Burden, if you don't know, created Mystery Man and Flaming Carrot, and he's from Atlanta, and he's awesome. So, but that's a different story. Okay, moving on. Memoir, semi-memoir. My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris. Wow, I really like this book. I mean, I just like this kind of style where you really feel like you're in the character's head and you're going through what she's going through. And as a kid, I identified with the Wolfman more than any other Universal monster or classic monster. The Wolfman was my guy. So seeing her identify with the same character, I totally get that. Totally on page with her and what it's like to feel a little bit different from everyone else, and kind of being on the outside looking in and looking for your place in the world. So wow, good stuff, very powerful. All right, let's move on to crime noir books. Fatale it's a supernatural thing, but it's the noir feel that I enjoyed the most. I really liked the main character, the character that refuses to die. I mean, it's just really good stuff, but it's also got just that perfect crime noir sensibility that Brubaker is so good at. And another kind of crime book, Southern Bastards by Jason Aaron and Jason Latour. Wow, really like this, and I don't know if it's because I'm from the South and just felt they really captured everything that I love and hate about the South. If you read their introductions, you see they have a very interesting love-hate relationship of the South. Or just a good story, about a man who decides he's just had enough and he's not going to take any more. It's and it continues from there. So it's that's a really good series. But I think one of the most exciting things that I came across in the teens was the Parker series, especially the outfit and the score, which came out in the teens. I think the first one actually came out before the teens, but these two books were excellent continuations of the Parker series by Richard Stark, and great artwork by Darwin Cook, who I continue to miss terribly. I really liked his work on this series, and I wanted him to do the whole damn series. He just has that great retro sensibility and really gorgeous, sharp, strong artwork. Okay, more noir, kind of. Marvel noir. Hawkeye by Matt Fraction and David Aja, I think is how I would, or is it Aja, or is it Aya? I'm not really sure. I have my apologies to the artist. I really liked. I think everybody that I talked to really liked this series. I think it makes up for the fact that, like when he's an Avenger, Hawkeye doesn't always kind of, he doesn't always stand up to the others power-wise. But if you, putting him in his own neighborhood, in his own world, taking care of some local problems, was a lot of fun. A lot of great action. I would say like the action itself is very Mike Allred, like the layouts and such, and even the colors. But the artwork is a lot looser than Mike Allred's, and it actually has kind of a grainy 1970s gritty movie feel, and just great action. It's just a lot of fun, and that's what comics should be. It's just a whole lot of fun. Moon Knight by Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey. I had read this a couple times, and I went back and read it again recently, and I'm a big fan of Warren Ellis, and not just, it's not just because an Ellis book I will automatically like it, but so far, like most of the stuff that I've read by him, I've loved. And I haven't read everything he does, but I really like his take on Moon Knight, and I really like when the supernatural element is, made a little bit stronger. I mean, I think that's what I appreciate. I always like the creepy, and when he puts the creepy into the character, I think I enjoy it a lot more than if he's too straightly played. Okay, let's move on. Gimmicks. My favorite gimmick comic was the Madman In Your Face 3D special. Man, that was a lot of fun. I am such a fan of 3D comics and 3D movies. I actually have made my own 3D glasses out of parts from the 100 yen store. And I have like 6 pairs of handmade 3D glasses. And so I had plenty of choice for which glasses I wanted to use to look at the gorgeous art in this 3D special. It's I made everybody who came to my house put on some glasses and take a look at this book because it's just, I've always remembered loving the 3D comics, even the non-colored, just, basically magenta and cyan colored comics that basically look brown when they're, on top of those colors are on top of each other. Because I always liked imagining being in those worlds. So anything with depth, anything with lots of depth, I really want to explore and throw my imagination as deep as I can into these other worlds. That is basically the main reason I saw Avatar 7 times in the theater. 3 different kinds of IMAX, 2 different countries, 2D, 3D, because I was exploring that space. That was, for me, that was everything. It was an adventure. It was like a ride at an amusement park. So I really dig into 3D stuff. And so this kind of throwback gimmick is, welcome. I love that kind of thing. Okay, webcomics. Hark a Vagrant by Kate Beaton was, wow, I thought this was just some funny, little bit twisted stuff and historical, and I'm not a history guy, but she makes history fun and interesting and funny, mostly. One of the things that she did that I loved the most was she would take covers of the Nancy Drew books and then turn those into, tell us the story behind them. And the story is always crazy. Nancy Drew is super crazy in her world. Okay, I'm going to move on. Adaptations. I think H.P. Lovecraft's The Hound and Other Stories by Tanabe Go. Oh man, the artwork takes a little bit to get used to, because it's so stark and black and white, and there's almost no gradation, and it's almost being like in a 3D game. It's just the proportions and everything. But once your eyes adjust to this starkness, it's just very, very wonderful adaptations. Probably some of the best Lovecraft adaptations I've ever read in comics form. So definitely give that a look. Okay, extrapolations. Providence by Alan Moore and Jacen Burrows. Wow, this was a ride. I mean, I didn't realize what all the things that were being referenced, the Lovecraft references in the series. I recognized a lot of them, but I still didn't realize what many of them were. It's when those wonderful websites with all the annotations come out that you really can go back and enjoy the fullness of this thing. It's very disturbing. There's things that you can't unsee. Very disturbing. It's not for the faint of heart. And it's not a fun comic. It's just a very... it hits you from many directions, and it's very heavy, and it's like a heavy trip, and it doesn't leave you the same. So, it's advanced. I'll just put it that way. Okay, finally, my favorite topic, horror. Rachel Rising by Terry Moore. Terry Moore always has the most gorgeous artwork and really relatable characters. And the best horror is the horror where you're invested in the characters, and so then you actually don't want anything to happen to them. So the horror takes on another level. It starts out just very intriguing when the main character basically digs her way out of her grave. It's got a great storyline, and it's over several volumes, so there's enough depth to it that it'll keep you entertained for quite a while. Afterlife with Archie, of course, I think that was a big hit, a big surprise for everyone. For one, I think I read my last Archie comic when, I was preteen. And so, I was pretty much felt I was done with that world, but they sure found a great way to get me back in, zombies that aren't played for laughs. It was a lot of love for the genre. The writer Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, really got me to remember what I liked about those characters. And then seeing them get torn to pieces was lots of fun. Lovingly drawn by Francesco Francavilla. Wow, this guy's work. I look at a lot of his stuff. He does a lot of reimagining of posters and all kinds of things. He's got a great love of science fiction and horror, and he just got a really good design eye. An eye for design is what I want to say. I've lived in Japan too long, so deal with it. Anyway, but my favorite horror book of the teens is Harrow County. It's another subscription that I had on Comixology, and I looked forward to this book every month. It's by Cullen Bunn and Tyler Crook, and again, because I'm from the South, you can tell that this is authentic. You can tell that the writer is from the South, and he's just like the Southern Bastards. There's a love there for the craziness of the South, while at the same time there's there's a fear and a hatred of the darkness that you come across in the Deep South. What I enjoyed about this book, the monthlies, is that the letters pages and the people telling their own whispers and rumors and legends and stories, and the other extra material in the comics themselves made it a much deeper, more fun reading experience. Okay, I'm going to finish off with the scariest damn comic I've ever read. This was recommended by Kumar on the Deconstructing Comics Facebook page. It's Youth in Decline's Frontier Number 6 by Emily Carroll, and By the Bed. Oh man, I made the mistake of reading this at 2 in the morning and could not sleep for at least an hour. It's got all the great things that I love about folklore and those old urban legends and all those kind of things rolled up into a very scary tale in just a few short pages. I mean, it's maybe not an easy book to get a hold of, but it's definitely worth your while to track a copy down. I had mine sent all the way to Japan so that I could enjoy it, and enjoy it I did. Thank you, Kumar. Well, that's it for me. Very quick rundown of the things that I liked. Sure, I would love to get into more detail about many of these, but hopefully I gave you some ideas for exploration. Thank you. Patrick out.
Patrick and I are cooking up a new podcasting project, which we hope to unveil this spring. Stay tuned. Coming up, more of our favorite comics of the past decade. I'm continuing to republish classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics in reverse order, unlocked by our patrons' generous support. This week's is number 69 from April 2nd, 2007, in which Brandon and I look at world building in Alan Moore and Gene Ha's Top 10. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com, or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page, or in the Patreon smartphone app. Classic episodes have been unlocked back to number 46. You can help to unlock earlier episodes by pledging. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
I crave superheroic content. Let's see what's on.
I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Nah, I don't think so.
I'm Batman.
Not really what I'm looking for.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
Ugh, absolutely not.
This is Robin the Boy Wonder. I'm Batman.
Aha, now that's more like it.
If you see Adam West as the one true Batman, then this is the podcast for you. Tune in every other Thursday on your favorite podcast source to hear Tim and Paul discuss the 1966 series and everything connected with it. What's the podcast called?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
Okay, I'm now talking with Chuck Coletta, who is at the Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. How are you, Chuck?
I'm fine. How are you?
Okay. So
Good.
I guess you have not been on this podcast before, so tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, the home of Superman, and I have been teaching out at the Department of Popular Culture at BGSU since 2000, so this is my 20th year there. And I teach classes mainly on film and television and media studies, pop lit, and I'm currently teaching a course on comic books and superheroes and American popular culture.
I see. Okay. And
Yeah.
you were one of the driving forces behind the Batman conference last year that I attended.
Right, and this coming April, the library is holding a romance novel conference, and we're working for the next one after that. It should be women in television, the history of women in television, and hopefully beyond that, another comic book one. But the Brown Popular Culture Library was started 50 years ago by Dr. Ray Brown, who started popular culture studies in academia, and he basically defined popular culture as the culture of everyday life. So it's Batman, and it's comic books, and amusement parks, and baseball games, you name it, we cover it.
I see. Okay, so tell us about your favorite comics from the past decade.
Okay, and what I tried to do is I tried to pick out a couple of things that were maybe not just strictly superhero books, but my favorite Batman series was something called Gotham Academy by Becky Cloonan, and I don't know if people have read that one, but it was really good. It's kind of a mix of Harry Potter and Batman, and a bunch of the 1966 Batman characters pop up in it. And then I also picked another straightforward superhero book, which was Mark Waid's Daredevil from a few years ago. And you said 5. So I really enjoyed the Scooby-Doo team-up, believe it or not. I didn't think I would be reading that one, but it was a really a love letter to Hanna-Barbera and DC Comics of the past.
So tell us more about the Scooby-Doo team-up. Who worked on it and what happened in that book?
Well, it was mostly written by a guy named Sholly, Sholly, Fish, and I believe it ran 50 issues. And every week the classic Scooby-Doo characters would team up sort of like in an old Brave and the Bold style. And so one month they're teaming up with the Flintstones or the Jetsons or another Hanna-Barbera property, Magilla Gorilla. But they also teamed up with a lot of the DC characters. So they had issues where they met Batman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Green Arrow and the Martian Manhunter and Black Lightning. And what was fun about it is they really sort of took a deep dive into very obscure corners of the DC universe. So you might see characters who were very sort of C and D list characters popping up in these adventures, and it was really fun. They were all these one and done issues, and they could be read by a kid and enjoy them. But if you were an old guy like me, you'd get the references to the Challengers of the Unknown, or old cartoons that hadn't been seen in decades, like Top Cat or Snagglepuss, things like that. So it was a lot of fun. I really was surprised how much I enjoyed it.
Now, was this at all connected to the other, Hanna-Barbera stuff, like the Flintstones, which was done in a very different way from the original TV show?
No, this was I think aimed more at kids, and it was done in a very traditional Hanna-Barbera style. So the characters looked exactly like you remember them from the 1970s, but they might be meeting Jonah Hex for an issue, or Plastic Man, or any sort of minor, sort of out of the way character. I think they teamed up with the Birds of Prey, whatever was going on, Aquaman, that kind of thing. It was a lot of fun.
Was that in continuity for the DC characters?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But they did a take on, for example, the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams hard traveling hero. So the Scooby-Doo van, the Mystery Machine, meets Green Lantern and Green Arrow as they're traveling across America, and they have an adventure, and they make references to the Arrow TV show that was recently on, and so it's just sort of fun, straightforward adventures, but it's got a nice sort of retro feel. No, it wasn't anywhere tied to the continuity. I don't think so. Okay. We shall see, and you never know.
Okay, and then what were your last two?
Oh, the last two were the one that I taught in class for several semesters was Brian K. Vaughan's Saga, which really went well over in class. I taught the first graphic novel. And then another one, sort of like Scooby-Doo, that I just picked up on a whim and was surprised how much I enjoyed it. Maybe from about 8 or 10 years ago, was Life with Archie, where they did a series of storylines where in one reality, they all grow up, and Archie in one reality marries Veronica, and in the other reality he marries Betty, and it was, believe it or not, it was like a multiverse kind of thing, and
I've read some of that.
It was really well done. Yeah, it was really well done, so. But it's kind of depressing when, Archie is struggling as a 20-year-old and can't pay the rent and but it was fun. So I really liked it for what it was.
What is it about Saga that interests so many people?
Well, it's the quote that I always use in my class when I've taught it is Brian Vaughan said he described it as Star Wars for perverts. So on one level, it's very mundane. It's these characters who have a baby and they're toting around diaper bags and going through all the stuff that married couples deal with little kids and not getting enough sleep, and then it's set in this bizarre quasi Star Wars, quasi Lord of the Rings world where there are all these strange aliens going around and different planets, and it's this all involved saga. But it's really well done, and I was surprised. I wanted to have my students read something current that wasn't superhero related, and we read the first 6 issues, and most of them really enjoyed it. A lot of them told me that they got addicted to it, and then they ran out and bought the subsequent trade paperbacks. So it really is one of the best stories in the sense that it has good cliffhangers. He always ended well on, what's going to happen next month, and it was always the first book that I would read when it was coming out. And I guess it's coming out again, but I don't know. It's on hiatus at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Actually,
but it was fun.
It dawns on me, I only came up with 2, and I should have come up with 3 because I forgot to think of Paper Girls.
That's right. That's a good one,
I've read some of Saga, but Paper Girls really captured my imagination more. Maybe just because I like time travel stories.
Right.
And I think Cliff Chang's art really contributed to it a lot. That
right.
kept me attracted to it too. And we talked about Paper Girls in episode 596 a couple years ago, so I don't want to talk about it too much here. But yeah, that was a series I really enjoyed.
The only thing I would mention is Brian Vaughan is also, coincidentally, I don't know him, but he did grow up in Cleveland. And it's very much a Cleveland story. Some of the references and some of the character names are sort of based around Rocky River, Ohio, where he grew up, where I did spend a lot of time. And so if you grew up in Cleveland or in northeastern Ohio, you'll especially like it because he's definitely sort of hearkening back to his childhood in the 1980s. But that was a great one. That was really well done.
Well, Ohio's the comics capital of the world, isn't it? And it seems like there have been so many creators who came from there.
Well, you can get on your license plate here. You can get the Superman emblem officially on your license plate. It says, in the state of Ohio, and it says "Truth, Justice, and the American Way." The state originally wanted to have the license plates read "Birthplace of Krypton," but DC apparently would not allow that because Superman comes from Krypton. He does not come from Ohio. But we're still working on a Superman statue here in Cleveland. It's never happened. They always announce it, and then we all get excited, and then it always sort of dies away. But maybe for the 90th anniversary, we'll see.
So
I don't know.
Both of the creators, Siegel and Schuster, were they from Cleveland?
Right, they grew up in Cleveland in a section called Glenville, and you can still go to you can't go into the house. A family lives there, but the house where they created Superman still exists. They've painted it in the Superman colors, and there's like a Superman fence around it. So you can see the spot where Superman was created. It still stands, and the family still lives there.
So going back a bit, you mentioned Gotham Academy?
Right.
Talk about that some more. I've heard of it, but I don't know very much about it.
Well, basically, it's the story of for people who haven't read it. It's basically Hogwarts in Gotham City, and it's a private academy where these kids have these adventures, and it's a spooky old private prep school for boys and girls, and it follows this main character named Olive. And she has a connection to Batman's past. And what I liked about it, it's very fun. It's very much aimed at a young reading audience, too. But they've thrown in some of the characters from the old Batman TV show in. So there is a character who's called like the house mother. I think she is. It's Aunt Harriet, and they call her Aunt Harriet, and she looks like Aunt Harriet from the TV show.
So she looks like Madge Blake. Huh?
She looks like Madge Blake, and there's a character who is the, I believe he's the librarian in the school, and it's Roddy McDowall as the bookworm. It's him, dressed in the outfit and the hat and the big glasses, and I think they call him Mr. Scarlet. I think that might be his real name, but they call him the bookworm, and so you see these nods to the old TV show and other parts of the sort of unused parts of the Batman universe, and I'm just sorry it hasn't continued. It was really well done, and I hope that it'll be brought back. But it's a really good way for young people. If you know any kids who like Harry Potter or that kind of material, this is for them. Bruce Wayne pops up occasionally, but he's not the focus of the story. It's the story of these kids, and they're living on the edges of Gotham, and they have a mystery to solve and that kind of thing. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's worth at least the first trade paperback is worth checking out to see if you like it.
Okay. So I mentioned Paper Girls. Another one that we have talked about on the show before, a long time ago, episode 419, was Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley, which came out in 2014. And yeah, I mean, it's funny, and it's also kind of poignant, and talking about how we can make our own situation worse and worse while we keep rationalizing everything, and just denying the obvious. You can tell from looking at it and from the humor that it's by the creator of Scott Pilgrim, but it feels more kind of mature and well thought out than Scott Pilgrim did. Scott Pilgrim was kind of done on the fly, I think, making decisions in the middle of writing, kind of like Death Note.
Right.
But this feels really, really well planned, and yeah, I really liked, and I've read it 2 or 3 times now. It really stands up to multiple readings.
Oh, good. I haven't read that one. I'm going to have to look that up. I haven't read that one yet.
Yeah. And I'm kind of waiting impatiently for the next work from him. I mean, I read some of... Have you ever read Snot Girl?
No, I didn't. I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, so O'Malley's writing, the art is by Leslie Hung, and actually when I interviewed him, I believe he said that it was kind of more her book, even though he's writing. And I just didn't find it interesting. I found it kind of confusing. I kind of just gave up on it after a while.
Yeah.
But apparently he's been working for some time on a graphic novel called Worst World, but reportedly he was experiencing writer's block and couldn't make his deadline on it. So Wikipedia now says there's no scheduled release date. So it's kind of when he finally gets his mojo back that he can finish it and put it out.
Well, I'll have to check that one out too. I've heard of it. I've seen it in the store, but I never picked it up yet, so I will.
And finally, I wanted to talk about, and I don't know, this might surprise some people, the Superior Spider-Man.
Oh, wow.
So in 2013, 2014, of course, Dan Slott was writing Spider-Man at the time. He wrote it for quite a few years. And so in Amazing Spider-Man 698, so Dr. Octopus was dying, and somehow, the science is ludicrous, of course, but he manages to switch brains with Peter Parker. And so, Octopus's brain is in Spider-Man's body and vice versa, and Oc's body dies. And so it seems as if Peter is done for. And Doc Ock as Spider-Man is like, I'm going to be a much better Spider-Man than he ever was. So I thought it was interesting seeing how someone with but much different life experiences and different values would handle being Spider-Man. In some ways he did things, or at least he seemed to be doing things in a smarter way than Peter did. But of course, and I guess it had to end this way. But over time, his approach, the flaws in his approach, more and more were revealed. And of course, his sense of how to deal with the criminals was different. He saw that Peter would. There was this character who was this remorseless murderer called Massacre, and Pete had faced him before, and he was put in jail or whatever. But then he got back out and he was killing people again, and so the Otto Octavius way to deal with that was just to kill him, which of course Peter would never ever do.
Right.
But his justification was, if you just put him in jail, he's going to get out again and he's going to kill people again. So let's deal with this threat permanently, which is iffy on the morality side, but it's understandable, in a cold, calculating way. Have you read it at all?
These characters. No, I haven't read that. I haven't read enough Spider-Man, and I know people who are just obsessed with Spider-Man. I've got a friend who named his son Parker after Spider-Man, and and like what you were saying, how many times has he fought Doc Ock? And you have to find new ways to have them battle and not make it seem repetitious. So that's an interesting way to do the switch bodies, and it's very, very kind of Silver Agey Marvel, in a certain sense. So I'm going to have to pick that one up. That's another interesting one. There's just too much to read. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I thought it was kind of an amazing thing that they let Slott do that with their flagship character for a year and a half. It was coming out every 2 weeks, so it was 31 issues, plus there were a couple of annuals. I was rereading the whole thing this past week, and I found that I apparently never got the second annual. I have to maybe look for it on Comixology. But and I think I haven't really been paying attention to it, but I think they've now got a new Superior Spider-Man title going, which I don't know if that's like Untold Tales of Doc Ock as Spider-Man or what that is, but the original was 2013-2014 by Dan Slott with various artists.
Well, I've always been more of a DC person, and so I know that world or universe much better, and I have to pick up the slack on Marvel. I was always a DC kid from the beginning, so I'm woefully ignorant on most things Spidey.
Okay, well I'm just
vaguely
the
aware
opposite.
of them, but not.
In spite of my love of Batman 66, in terms of comics, I was always a Marvel reader, and the DC comics never really appealed to me or my brother. So we were much better versed in Marvel stuff than DC. To the point where I try to read DC comics sometimes and I just can't get into them.
The tone is very different.
and the background is kind of impenetrable too, because they tend to write it on the assumption that about the stuff that came before, and I don't. So
right, that's true. That is true.
As far as Superior Spider-Man, I also thought it was interesting. So Slott set up a bunch of things before the switch happened that then continued to play out when Doc Ock was Spider-Man. It wasn't like starting with a clean slate. He was dropped into the middle of these situations where the Hobgoblin had been. I guess I didn't read the prior issues of Amazing, but there were a couple of different people who were Hobgoblin, and they were battling it out. And then after Ock became Spider-Man, then the Green Goblin came in. He was fighting the Hobgoblin, and then he got Hobgoblin to join him, and that became a whole thing. That was sort of led up to the climax of the series. But there was just so much going on in the series, because you had so Doc Ock as Peter was not a very good actor. Pete was clearly so different, and people were like, what is going on with him?
Right.
And, on the plus side, he was able to do things that Pete never did, like finally get his doctorate, and start his own corporation, Parker Industries. Then his relationships with, Aunt May and Mary Jane and J. Jonah Jameson are all affected by the change. And then you've got kind of the ghost of Pete in the background in some issues. Well, in the early going, Pete is somehow still shows up in his own body, kind of battling it out with Doc Ock, and Doc Ock manages to completely, seemingly erase him, but then somehow later he comes back, and by the end, as I was saying, it probably had to end this way. By the end, Doc Ock realizes that Pete actually was the Superior Spider-Man, because he's created such a mess by the end that he realizes that he doesn't know how to solve it, and Pete would be able to sweep things up. So he erases his own memories from Pete's brain, and so Ock is seemingly dead. Of course he's not, but and then Pete becomes Spidey again and wraps things up.
Well, that sounds cool. I'm going to have to definitely read that. You piqued my interest.
Okay. And then, like all these other things, Spider-Man 2099 shows up. And Pete gets taken over, or Pete's body gets taken over by the Venom symbiote again in a couple of issues. It's crazy. There's so much going on in that series. So, it was one I enjoyed. I know parts of it were kind of controversial at the time. But I thought it was fun.
Well, you know what? I can't. I'm at the point now. I've read enough comics for enough years that I don't get too upset about anything, because everything reverts back to normal.
Sure.
If you don't like the way they're writing something at the moment, come back in a few months or next year, and how many different versions of Batman and Spider-Man have I seen in the last few years? So I don't get riled anymore like some of these people do.
Right? Yeah, I remember.
Maybe I'm just getting old.
Hearing about that on iFanboy, that people were freaking out, like, oh, they changed Spider-Man, and the guys on iFanboy were saying, well, that's when we know he's going to revert. That's the story. How does Pete come back? Right. So it's nothing is permanent. They're always going to reset. Almost always going to reset back to the status quo, more or less.
That's right. Well, by the time the next movie comes out, he'll be back to himself again.
Right. Okay. Thanks a lot for coming on and talking about some of these best comics from the past decade.
Well, thank you for having me, and tell your brother, both of you, keep up the good work. You've got a lot of loyal listeners here in Ohio. Keep up the great work.
Thanks. Yeah, well, we've been on kind of a hiatus because both of us have been too busy, but we're trying to claw our way back into it. Hopefully in early March we'll get something out.
Well, you need a rest after it. I watched Legend of the Superheroes. I watched it in 1979, so I understand why you need a break. So you deserve it.
Yeah, after 2 episodes talking about Legends, we had to step away.
Well, anytime. If you ever need me for anything, I'm disgustingly available. You guys do a great show. I stumbled upon it a couple of years back, and I'm slowly working my way through the Batman 66 episodes. So they're great. Keep up the great work.
Okay, thanks. Well, and then we've got 800 some Deconstructing Comics episodes out there too.
Right. Those two.
Chuck Coletta is on Twitter at drpopculturebg. Support this and all of our shows by joining us on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our Patreon-only series Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU, where this Saturday we'll release our review of Captain Marvel. We discussed it once before in Critiquing Comics 154, and Mulele had some problems with it while I found it enjoyable. How does it look to us now, almost a year later? Support us on Patreon to hear our second look at the film. At $4, you can also get opportunities to participate in the show. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. A new Critiquing Comics is coming up on March 7th. And next week, EMMET is joined by Bryan Cremens to look at last year's other Captain Marvel film, Shazam. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.